Story 1. Backstory. I had this neighbor in the flat below mine that moved in right around the same time I did. Originally, his apartment was for sale, and I was renting mine in the building above. When he first moved in, he left a note for the entire building, that he was doing some renovations and may be loud for a bit. It was pretty inconvenient, considering a stay-at-home order had just been issued for the first time in our country. But I decided the better move was just to wait a month or two for him to get settled, and not saying anything. Well, time went on. He had successfully torn out all his walls, ceiling, and flooring. The whole process was incredibly loud, with him banging, drilling, and playing loud music while doing so every day. Once everything had been torn out, I had assumed he would get to fixing it immediately. This didn't happen. Apparently he liked living like he was in a slum. He would play his speakers every day, so I definitely knew he was home. He would throw parties, which was definitely illegal at the time. He and his friends would scream and play music until 3 or 4 a.m. every day, regardless of the day of the week. Obviously, at this point I was sick of it because I'm forced to be at home, and I can't concentrate or sleep with all of this going on. So I kindly write him a note asking if he could maybe keep it down, as I can't do anything to get away from him and his noise right now. He seemed nice about it and said that he would be fixing the walls and ceiling soon. I didn't see any reason at the time to push the issue further, but no more than a week after we spoke, he went back to his old nonsense, of course. At this point, I tried to contact my landlord and see if she was willing to do something about this, because my apartment was pretty much unlivable during quarantine at this point. I'd been losing my mind for months by now. She said she didn't rent to him, which was a duh. His mom bought the apartment for him, and said there's nothing she could do. So I tried to give it another whirl by coming to an agreement with my neighbor. This time, I had specific terms, such as the request to only play loud music from 8 a.m. and no later than 23 o'clock on weekdays. If he's going to have a party, it would be nice if he told me beforehand so I know if it's a day before an exam. For example, this was a very reasonable ask at the time, because legally he wasn't even allowed to have more than one person over at a time, due to corona restrictions. To this, he basically told me to sit on a cactus, and that he didn't want to go by arbitrary rules. Some months pass, and I find an absolute gem of a new apartment both my boyfriend and I can officially live in. The bonus was that it was in a prime location, for $450 less per month than I was already paying. So I canceled my lease, 30 notice, etc. and my boyfriend and I started moving into the new place immediately. Well, during the time I was moving places, there was a giant freeze in my country. Nobody was prepared because it never snows here anymore. One Friday evening, a couple days after it started freezing, I got a call from my neighbor at my old place, asking if I'm home. I say no. I started moving into a new place a few weeks back. Apparently, one of the pipes had frozen in my old studio and had created a massive leak in his. Despite having had a few drinks before taking the call, I kept my composure and said, well, that's unfortunate. I will take a look at the old place tomorrow when I have the time. Then I laughed immediately after hanging up. I got to my apartment the next day and saw that the sink had spit up everywhere, leaving rusted metal everywhere. I called my landlord and they sent out a plumber. The issue on my end was solved. But nevertheless, about a few days later my neighbor texts me saying there's still electrical damage in his apartment from all the water. He wants my insurance to cover it. I told him no, my insurance will not cover it because it only covers damages I caused. I did not cause this problem. He should talk to my landlord. End of story. Never heard from him again, but I never gave him a dime. Saw his mom helping him move stuff, presumably back to her house. Story 2. It's been a while since I posted, but I'm back with a good story. As a reminder, I work as a lifeguard at a water park, and I frequently deal with entitled guests, especially difficult parents. Recently, I was promoted to head lifeguard, essentially the manager, which has introduced a whole new set of challenges. What I'm about to share happened today during my 14.5-hour shift. I witnessed plenty of incidents, but nothing frustrated me more than this one. The day began as usual with my head guard responsibilities, starting up the water attractions, organizing the guard rotation, and other routine tasks. We opened the park at 9 a.m., and everything went smoothly until 10:12 a.m. That's when a family arrived: a mom, dad, young daughter, and 3 teenage boys, all around 17 or 18 years old. The boys immediately became an issue for my lifeguards. Throughout the day, I received about 10 separate complaints about their behavior. However, since they kept switching between different sections of the park, and communication between those sections wasn't seamless, it took time for the issues to accumulate into a clear pattern. By 4 p.m., during the second shift, things reached a tipping point. It's worth mentioning that I have a reputation among the staff for how I handle entitled guests, unruly children, and rude visitors. I don't tolerate nonsense, which might be why the following situation unfolded the way it did. While I was in the first aid room reviewing the cameras, I heard a loud, double whistle, a signal that something significant had occurred. It could indicate an accident, an injury, or something requiring immediate attention. I rushed over to find a visibly angry mother yelling at one of my guards, who also happens to be a close friend of mine from my time as a regular lifeguard. That connection immediately put me on high alert. Stepping in, I calmly asked, "Can I help with something?" The mother, let's call her the entitled mom, wasted no time. "Yes, this person," she began, using a choice word I won't repeat. Interrupting her, I said, "Let's keep the language appropriate." She sighed dramatically before continuing, "This guard banned my son and his friends from the slide for no reason." I looked over and recognized the boys are troublemakers of the day. I turned to the guard and instructed, "Keep an eye on the water. I'll handle this." Then I addressed the mother directly. "Ma'am, just to clarify, your son and his friends aren't banned from the slide." She immediately interrupted, "So then why?" I held up my hand to stop her. "They're banned from the park." Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She shouted questions and hurled insults, demanding to know why. Once she finally calmed down enough to listen, I explained, "They violated nearly every rule we have and caused repeated problems throughout the day." At this point, the entitled mom's outrage shifted to disbelief. What could they possibly have done that was so serious? I began listing their offenses. They've endangered themselves, other guests, and my lifeguards with reckless behavior. They've gone down slides the wrong way, jumped out halfway down, and nearly hit other guests while misusing basketballs as dodgeballs, which is strictly against the rules. On top of that, we have guards stationed at the bottom of every slide for safety reasons. Their behavior put those guards at risk of serious injury. By acting this way, they could have given themselves or others concussions or even caused broken bones. Still, she argued, "But we paid for a room for 2 nights. I remained firm but polite. "That's not an issue. You, your husband, and your daughter are welcome to stay and enjoy the park. However, the boys must leave. You can either take them home or have them stay in the room for the remainder of the evening." Desperate to regain control of the situation, she tried another approach. "But what about—" I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, this isn't a debate. You're not in a position to argue. You're in a position to comply. If they don't leave within the next 10 minutes, they will be escorted out." The entitled mom stood there, momentarily stunned, before storming off to the hot tub. Since she made no move to comply, I decided to act immediately. I used my walkie-talkie to call security, giving them the code for guest removal. The security team arrived promptly. We located the boys, escorted them to their parents, and ensured they returned to their room, still dripping wet from the water. I'll admit, I might have been a bit blunt, but her combative attitude left me no choice. On top of that, her earlier insult toward my friend and colleague didn't sit well with me. Her behavior delayed my routine tasks, including a vital check on the water's chemical levels, so I was entirely done with the situation by the end. Story 3. I currently work as an ASM at a clothing retailer as a result of the pandemic absolutely screwing everyone over and causing my office to decide to do remote work from home only. The problem was their low-tech IT team couldn't even have the virtual phones handle the call load. My nerves were shot. PTSD hit from the pandemic. I was being screamed at by angry customers waiting on the line all day, and I had to quit. Back to my backup, your old retail job. Oddly enough, as exhausting as the retail job is, I don't hate it like I hated the call center. So, there was this guy who came into the store. He was carrying a case for the clothes and was relatively nice at the get-go. Asked me how my day was going, etc. They always act nice, at first. Well, he came to return some clothes and presented me with the receipt. I check it, and then I notice that the date is from 2 months previous, and it's a week after it's due. Our store policy requires you to return clothes no later than 60 days with a receipt, and you can get all your money back. If you don't, you only get the value of the clothes back, not the full amount. I told him this. He immediately gets angry and is like, No, forget it. That's not the policy. The other store let me return it once. Well, there are like 10 other stores in the area with extremely low pay, and chances are some newbie let one slip by, or maybe the general manager called and got it overridden. This is rare, but it happens. Regardless, he's still going full Karen, and that's when it hits me. I know this guy. I was homeschooled back in the day, went to a few classes on the side, and some were camp events. I'm the daughter of a pastor, so of course, they were Christian-centered. I'm a deist now, if anything. This guy was one of the dads of a bunch of kids. It was like 0.12 kids, but that number may have gone up to 15 cause his wife was still having kids after high school, in this homeschooling group. He was actually a chaperone, and his family housed us for a camp-like event at one point. This event was annoying to me in that they forced us not to use any form of media, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, video games, movies, whatever. They wanted us to be taught how they were taught. Note, I hate this form of control and will rebel against it every time. I brought my laptop and played games and watched movies while we weren't at classes because screw that. Well, apparently, one of the kids, my roommate, ended up being displaced in this camp because they lost her information, and according to them, she wasn't supposed to be there. This was obviously some clerical error. For some reason, this dad, because he was the man of the house, for God's sake, actually had a say if she were to stay or to go. I remember being on the phone with the director myself with this girl in tow, asking what we could do while her parents dredged up the copies of the paperwork or what was going to happen to her. This man, also a pastor I might add, who I've had to listen to sermons about learning subservient wifely duties from, ended up doing absolutely nothing to help. He could have agreed to let her stay on until they got it fixed and help her avoid a total anxiety meltdown, but that didn't happen. Thankfully, I think this whole debacle got fixed 2 days after. She ended up briefly moving out and moving back in. Regardless, I was angry at him for not stepping in to help, saying anything, or doing anything, and he got labeled a lily-livered, hyper-conservative weakling in my head. Apparently, this stuck. Well, anyway, this guy was now ranting in front of me, saying how he knew better than I did and how he wanted corporate's number. I tell the general manager, she goes to try and override it, and it gets denied. So she hands him the number and tells him that our policy is printed on the back of the receipt. He still says he doesn't believe a word we're saying and doesn't even bother to check the actual back of the receipt. The whole time, I'm ramping up for the thing that will make my whole day go a lot better. When he finally gets the number and is about to storm out, I go, "Are you Mr. X?" He goes, "Yes." "Me? Oh, I'm Y." The man's face just turns red from embarrassment, and he realizes who he's talking to because that's literally all it takes. I've never had this happen before, so this was a treat too. He starts mentioning my parents and blah, blah, blah pleasantries, blah, blah, blah. He mentions my dad because apparently the men of the family are the only ones worth any memory. Then he starts pulling a woe is me card. I have empathy, but not when it comes to excusing away behavior, and I just nod my head. Finally, he goes, "Oh yeah, I usually go to the store in this town, and we've had this happen before, and I may not have to call." At this point, he's just rambling and backpedaling into the hole he's dug for himself, and finally, he just kind of flits out. This point blank stopped him from continuing his Karen behavior and for not believing us, because, you have to believe the pastor's daughter. Also, it confirmed my label. #validated. Good riddance. My manager and I had a laugh after this, and I felt on air for the rest of the day. Pretty sure he never called corporate. Story 4. I'm a 17-year-old college student, and between my studies and part-time job at the local cinema, I try to help out at home as much as I can. My mom's been working double shifts at the hospital lately, and my younger sister's got special needs, so things can get pretty hectic. When Mom asked me to do the grocery shopping that December afternoon, I didn't think twice about it. The weather was miserable that day, typical British winter, with freezing rain and wind that cuts right through you. I just finished my morning classes and figured I'd pop into Lidl before heading home. The store was surprisingly empty for a weekday afternoon, which was a relief because I really wasn't in the mood for crowds. I'd been methodically working through Mom's shopping list for about 10 minutes when I passed the confectionery aisle. That's when I spotted a thin Carré chocolate bar. Now, normally I'm pretty careful with money, but I'd just gotten my paycheck, and I figured I deserved a small treat. It was my favorite flavor, too dark chocolate with hazelnuts. After grabbing everything on the list and my chocolate, I headed to the checkout. There were only 2 tills open, and I chose the shorter queue. While waiting, I started scrolling through my phone, checking messages from my college mates about our group project. That's when I heard her behind me. She asked if I would mind letting them go in front of me in line. I looked up from my phone and saw a woman with a cart that was practically overflowing with groceries. Her son, who looked about 8, was bouncing around like he'd consumed an entire pack of energy drinks. I glanced at my own cart. I only had about 15 items, but still, I wasn't in any particular hurry, so I decided to be nice. I told her it was fine and moved my cart back to let her pass. She thanked me quickly as she wheeled past. That should have been the end of it, but then her kid noticed my chocolate. The boy excitedly pointed out to his mother that it was the same chocolate she had promised to buy him on their next shopping trip. The woman remembered her promise and turned to me with what I can only describe as a fake sweet smile. She asked if she could have my chocolate bar, explaining that her little one had been eager to get it. Now, here's the thing, this particular Lidl doesn't stock these chocolates at the till. They're kept in an aisle clear across the store. I'd have to abandon my spot in line, walk all the way back, and probably end up waiting in queue all over again. I politely explained that I couldn't give her the chocolate because it was quite far from the tills. The transformation in her face was instant, like someone had flipped a switch. She started yelling that she didn't care how far the chocolate was, and that someone like me was perfectly capable of getting a new bar. She demanded that I stop making her son upset. I stood my ground and told her firmly that regardless of my capability, I wasn't going anywhere and the chocolate would stay in my cart. That's when things went from bad to worse. Her kid started reaching into my cart, trying to grab the chocolate. I quickly snatched it up and held it away from him. The boy immediately called out to his mother, complaining that I had taken the chocolate. The woman declared she'd had enough. What happened next still makes my scalp hurt just thinking about it. This woman, this grown adult, actually grabbed my hair and yanked me backward. I could feel strands of hair being pulled out of my head as I stumbled. Fight or flight kicked in, and I managed to break free and dash to the cashier. The cashier had seen everything and was already on the phone with security. Within minutes, the store manager arrived, and they called the police. Turns out the whole thing had been caught on the store's security cameras, and several other customers had recorded it on their phones. The police arrived quickly, and the woman started crying, claiming I'd been aggressive toward her son. However, the security footage told a different story. She was arrested for assault, and I later found out she had a history of similar incidents at other stores in the area. I pressed charges, and she ended up getting a fine and community service. The store manager gave me a gift card as an apology for the incident, and I got a year's worth of free Fin Carré chocolate, though honestly, it took me a while before I could enjoy it again without thinking about the incident. The best part? Her son was actually old enough to understand what happened, and I overheard him telling his father, who came to pick him up, that his mother had done something bad. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. Story 5. I have been keeping to myself since I was 17 years old. This story is around 6 years old, and I haven't told anyone else about it ever, and it's going to be a long one. This is a story where I got my neighbor's bully of a daughter arrested, outcasted by parents and the majority of her friends, and stripped of her popularity. Let me give you some backstory first. I have lived in my current house for over 20 years. My neighbors have been living in their house for around 15 years. The parents were nice, and they came from a Middle Eastern background. They have 3 kids, 2 girls and 1 boy. This is about their youngest daughter, who will be the neighbor daughter, who was the same age as me. She was nice to some extent. At the time I knew her only as a neighbor friend. She and I never went to the same school, but that all changed when I changed school during the 5th grade to her school. Ever since then, she and her friends have tried to make my school life a living hell. They would play pranks on me, ridicule and belittle me, and then call me names on social media, mostly Twitter, and at the time I didn't have Twitter until I was 15 or 16. This is important. By the way, I was diagnosed at 7 for ADHD and Asperger's, mild autism, so I was their mental punching bag. So years go by, and we are in high school. The neighbor daughter has jumped to being in the popular group, while I am with the weird and unpopular kind. Their attitudes towards me keep getting worse and worse. So one night, when I was around 17, I got a Facebook message from the neighbor daughter that she is having a party and wants me to come over. And I thought it was very unusual because of 1, she has never ever messaged me unless she has to. 2, she has never invited me to her parties before, so I immediately thought that this was a jip. At this point, I was getting sick of her and her friends making sneering comments about how weird and an idiot I am. So this was the perfect time to plan my revenge. So I asked my parents if I could go. Even though I was underage, drinking age is 18 here, they said it was fine because I would be next door. So I went, and the neighbor daughter was very surprised to see me. She and her friends started to giggle. So I followed her to the basement and saw all of the other popular kids from my school along with some others. So let me tell you this, I was only there for 30 minutes because after that I had all the evidence that I needed. I see beer pong, people getting high and smoking with bongs, and a lot of underage drinking. A lot of the others were the same age as me, maybe younger, because this party is around October, and I am pretty sure that almost everyone there just turned 17. I also noticed that neither of the parents or siblings was there. So I left. So I waited an hour because I didn't want to draw any attention. I was all ready for bed, and when I looked outside my bedroom window, which has a clear view of her front yard, and noticed that the party had moved to the front yard, and a third of the party people were leaving. So I started my plan. I went and grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them what everything was going on, as a concerned neighbor, and the officer thanked me. Just before I went to bed, I saw flashing lights. The next day at school, and the neighbor daughter was nowhere to be found, and there was a rumor going on that she and a bunch of other students were arrested last night due to illegally underage smoking and drinking, and so a week goes by and still no sign of her. Fast forward to 2 weeks after the incident, and during those 2 weeks, she and her friends completely trashed me on Twitter, saying that I was a R-word and that I was stupid and etc., still not knowing that I was the one who called the police. So I finally saw her in the halls and started to chat with her, and I asked what had happened because I saw police lights at her place. So she told me everything that I didn't already know, and then some. She told me that her parents had grounded her because she threw a party without their permission, and that her dad was furious. He is more traditional than her mom, and he has forbidden her to have or go to parties, or hang out with her friends and boyfriend, or even leave the house, unless it was for school or appointments. She was on total house lockdown, which took a big toll on her social standing at school. As she was telling me this, I was having a hard time keeping a straight face because I suck at lying and keeping a secret. and she sees this, and it clicks in her mind that I was the one who called the police. She was furious and threatened to tell the whole school about it, and I told her to go right ahead and added that no one was going to believe you. And then she stomps away. The thing is that even though I was unpopular, I was friends with almost everyone in my grade, especially with the guys from the most popular to the least, and as well as I am a goody two-shoes and one of the nicest and honest people ever. So she tried. The people who knew me the most didn't believe her and told her to go get lost. And the guys who were the most popular came up to me and asked if it was true. So I told them in the most innocent voice that why would I do that and what proof does she have? And then proceeded to tell them what she and her friends have been saying about me on Twitter and showed them proof of screenshots of their feed. So they said, "Yeah, we didn't think you would have it in you to do it." And then proceeded to tell everyone that I didn't call the police. So because of this, she became a social outcast among everyone except her closest friends, and was completely stripped of her popularity status. And after this incident, she had tried to get me in trouble with the principal, so, during a meeting with the principal, I returned the favor by telling them that she had no proof that I did it, and showed the principals her Twitter feed of everything that her and her friends were saying about me for the last year. The look on her face when she found out that I had Twitter and knew of her bad mouthing was priceless. And so, in turn, her parents completely deleted all of her social media accounts, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and took her computer and phone away until university. I didn't press cyberbullying charges because she wasn't actually attacking me. She was basically attacking me behind my back. Me being literal at the time. I am pretty sure she never ever forgave me for doing this to her. Story 6. I always thought these crazy people who don't mind their own business must be a rare breed, and that I would never encounter one of them, but somehow I did. So a little bit of background before I start. I was born in Pakistan, but came to Canada when I was 3. But by that time, I could already speak in Urdu, Punjabi and Hindi. The languages are fairly similar in many regards, and then I came to Canada and English was my 4th language. As I grew up, I also learned Arabic, French and Japanese to varying competencies, but all within the realm of conversational. Having grown up in Canada, I have no accent when I speak in English, so you wouldn't be able to tell me apart from a Caucasian person if you spoke with me over the phone. But also having learned so many languages, I'm able to pronounce a lot of sounds fairly accurately, so I sound authentic in all languages that I speak to all but native speakers. Most of the languages that I know sound different enough from each other that someone that doesn't know them can still tell that the language is different. I've traveled back home to Pakistan a few times, and I would always encounter those beggars who come with elaborate stories, like, "My wife is sick and she needs surgery, and I managed to get money for that, but I need money for the flight to reach her," etc. I came up with a fun counter to that, which was that I would act like I didn't understand them at all and would start speaking in a different language that they wouldn't know. Japanese was my go-to language while in Pakistan. The reaction those people would have was quite hilarious. As per apparently new rules, instead of acronyms, I'll use fake names. I'll keep them all 5-letter names so the columns line up decently enough. So anyway, on to my story now. The cast. Karen, the star of the show. Jimmy, Karen's husband, and a decent human being. Zara, me. Wifey, my wife. Singh, restaurant manager. So my wife and I were at an Indian restaurant in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, enjoying our dinner and having a conversation. We speak in a mix of Urdu and English, just mixing with whatever feels easy. To someone listening in, they would be able to understand enough to figure out what we are talking about in most cases. We were sitting at a booth table, so it was only open from one side. Karen and her family, Jimmy and her 2 daughters that looked like they were in their early teens, were sitting at an open table with an empty table between us. My wife is Pakistani like me, and what some Pakistanis like to do is eat rice with their hands. I prefer a spoon myself, but at this time my wife was eating with her hands. Apparently this Karen got offended at seeing my wife eat with her hands. When she came over, I started speaking in different languages, acting like I didn't understand what she was saying in English. I'll translate what I said and put in parentheses which language I said it in. Here's how it went. Karen walks over to our table with a sour expression on her face. Jimmy calls to her, telling her to sit back down and leave us alone, but she ignores him. She addresses my wife directly. Karen, what's wrong with you? Can't you eat your food in a civilized manner like the rest of us? Zarif in Urdu. Huh? What do you want? Can't you see we're eating? Karen looks at me with surprise. Karen, what did you just say? I say to my wife in Urdu, don't talk to her in English, just do what I'm doing. And then I say to Karen, you're just a crazy woman, go sit back down. Why aren't you speaking in English? My wife starts smiling, and I try hard to keep a straight face. Wifey, we are just enjoying our meal, why don't you go and sit down? Karen, I just heard you speaking in English. I know you can talk in English. Yeah, I can, but I choose to not do so. My wife says to me, I think she's getting upset. And I reply, I know, that's what makes this so much fun. Karen, stop it. Talk in English like I heard you before. Zarif in Japanese, so you were listening in on our conversation. Don't you have any manners? Karen, wait, that's some other language now. What the hell is this? Jimmy, leave them alone, Karen. They don't speak English. I know they do. They're just pretending not to. It doesn't matter, just sit down. I start waving toward her table. That's right, go back to your table, you loud cow. Jimmy, Karen, they aren't doing anything wrong. Leave them alone. Karen, she's eating with her hands. I can't let the girls learn her uncivilized ways. I say to my wife, in Hindi, start licking your fingers. My wife starts licking the rice on her right hand off the top parts of her fingers, and that makes Karen rage even more. Karen, oh my God, look at how gross she is being. Jimmy, stop looking at her if you don't like it then. Then I say in Arabic, hey you dumb witch, do you behave this way everywhere you go? Karen, he changed languages again. I know he did. His accent changed. I then reply in Japanese, yep, and I can keep changing. Karen, speak in English. Jimmy, you must have heard them wrong. They don't know English. Leave them alone. Then why are they living here? They don't deserve to live here if they don't know English. I was having a hard time keeping a straight face, so I disguised it by raising my voice and appearing angry. I gestured towards her and then pointed at her table. I say in Arabic, are you so dumb you can't even listen to your husband? Go sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. Karen, you don't deserve to be here. Get out. At this point, the restaurant's manager Singh shows up to see what all the commotion was about. He's an Indian guy with a pretty heavy accent when he speaks in English, so I knew he'd speak either Hindi or Punjabi. Singh, excuse me, can you please keep your voice down? What is going on here? Karen, this woman is eating with her hands and it's disgusting. She's corrupting my children with her barbaric ways. Singh, ma'am, there are no rules that forbid her from eating with her hands. Please leave them alone, or I'll have to ask you to leave. Now Jimmy gets up and comes over to where Karen is. Jimmy, sit down, Karen. You've embarrassed yourself enough. This is why I can't take you anywhere. I say in Punjabi, ignore this dumb cow. Her brain is smaller than a laddu, an Indian sweet. The manager starts laughing at my comment and Karen gets even redder in the face since she probably thinks we're making fun of her. Karen, all of you should go back to your country. Jimmy just takes her arm and leads her back to their table and sits her down, telling her to shut up. Her daughters look like they want to sink into the floor from embarrassment. I ramble a few more sentences in varying languages as a kind of venting before my wife tells me to just leave it alone. We finished our dinner about 10 minutes later, with Karen glaring at us the whole time. I go pay the bill, and as we are walking out of the restaurant, we pass near Karen's table. I call out to Jimmy in perfect English, with no accent, while smiling, and I give him a wave. Hey buddy, I hope you enjoy your dinner. Have a good night. Karen's eyes bulge as she screams. Karen, I knew it. See, they know English. She tried to stand up suddenly, but instead ended up falling over backwards in her seat. My wife and I left the restaurant laughing before she could do anything else.